Welcome back to the show. I'm John Ruffle, and I did warn you all a few days ago, we've got some special stuff coming up for 2021. And so it really is my tremendous privilege to introduce to you my friend and Christian author, Tim Riter, out in California. Hi, Tim. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, John. It's good to be.
Fantastic. And I know that you have got a little bit of a shared background to me, and I think that's really how we met, was because of, old Jesus freaks never die. We just go to heaven. And Tim is a fantastic motorbike fanatic, and I'm a bit of a car fanatic. But most of all, I think our first love is for our families and for Jesus. And I know for me, without Jesus, I wouldn't be here. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how it was that you came to this kind of faith encounter?
It's a fascinating story, John. I think I appreciate the chance to share it a little bit. I grew up in church. This is back in the 50s when things were much more traditional and stuffy. And the church taught Jesus correctly, but it was very legalistic. It was very behavior oriented. It wasn't so much relationship, and it didn't connect at all to the culture. I grew up with rock and roll on most of the week, and then Sundays, these hymns for Martin Luther. And there's a huge disconnect. Yeah. But I wanted to be, and I accepted Christ and got baptized at about age 11. And I was sincere, but my faith was pretty shallow. At the end of, before my senior year in high school up in church camp, I committed my life to the Christian ministry. And part of it, I had a camp romance going with a girl named Rosie, who was going to be a missionary to Africa. And I thought if I did something similar, I'd get an extra kiss that night. Well, the romance never developed. And part of it too was almost fire insurance. I thought, if I become a minister that's sacrificial, God would certainly give me admission to heaven. Entered a Christian college to prepare for the ministry. And the faith that was genuine was pretty shallow. And with the questions that come when you get out on your own, I think that's one of the benefits of college. You're in an environment where you can talk about things. There's freedom, a lot of different influences. And we would have some of the longest discussions. The guys would go into Bob's Big Boy, get a Big Boy hamburger and a chocolate shake and talk for hours and hours. But by the end of my first year, my faith had pretty much disappeared. I took about 3 years looking at various world religions, looking at the historicity, the evidence for all of them. And I got to the point where there was a huge problem in my life that I tried to change and couldn't. I had a huge innate selfishness. I was nice because I found out if you're nice to people, you get your way more often. Terrible reason to be nice. And then toward the end of my first year in grad school, God brought three things together. There's a college conference called Doing It, which is kind of an allusion to the sex in the era. But I saw people that were living their faith in a way that I needed. And a couple of other things came in, and I sat down in February 1971. I remember kneeling by my little twin bed, and I said, God, I think you're real. All the evidence points that way. I need you to change my life. And then with all the audacity of a 23-year-old, I said, God, you've got complete freedom to change me. And my subtext was, and if this works, I'm with you, but if it doesn't, I'm gone forever. And fortunately, God reached out and touched me within a week. Some people were saying, Tim, what's happened? You're different. That was during the time of the Jesus movement when Calvary Chapel was at the big tent meetings. And a couple of us on bikes would go up to Hollywood First Pres. They had a Christian coffee house, a salt company, and we'd go up to that. I ran a Christian coffee house for a while, and I loved the way the Jesus movement put together the culture of the young people with the Bible and community and people loving God and being sacrificial. Ironically, I had to do a master's thesis, and I did it on the Jesus movement. And it was about a communication theory called fantasy analysis, and it explains why it worked. And I've thought of a book. I've talked to a couple of people, no one's bit yet, about doing that book, but how to get ready for another Jesus movement where we would be sacrificial and be committed. It'd look totally different. The culture's changed. But I think in America, and I'm sure Britain, all around the world, we've become so partisan, so divided. We need to come back to Jesus. We've got our eyes off on making money, being successful, having a nice house, our party winning, and we've missed what following God is all about.
Wow. I mean, I can really relate to a lot of that, Tim, because I'm sure a lot of our college students watching will too, because it's like you go to college and all of a sudden it's like a new world of ideas and liberty. And, I was brought up in a church rather similar to you. And, there was the Beatles and then there were the church hymns. And I really wanted to be a good Christian. And, but I remember my mum saying to me one time when I was an adolescent, and it's really it hit home and hurt me. She said to me, "John, you've changed. And, I don't like what you're becoming." And to this day, I can remember I had an absolutely fantastic mum. My mum was the one that taught me how to pray. My mum was the one that said, Jesus will come back someday. And I only wish I could have held my mum and told her, "Mum, it's okay. I didn't join a cult. I'm still following Jesus," because I just wanted to be a missionary to Africa, the same as you. We'd have met in Africa. But I think that the Jesus movement, which I think historically you can put a date to it, about 1967 to 76, 77. And it was a revival movement, but I think a lot of people thought it was like a cult. They didn't understand it. But I think if you were at all into the counterculture, then it was something that resonated with people. People actually could make a genuine connection with, this is the Jesus, he's with us in the counterculture, and he's calling you to a personal relationship. And I think once the counterculture kind of diversified and the whole hippie thing went disastrous, I think the impetus of the Jesus movement also declined, because as you said, it's like it's tied in with the culture, isn't it? So how do we reach the culture today? That's really the question. I know one way you've done it is through your book. So I'm really keen to ask you about your books. But perhaps if you can say something about how we can reach to people to make Jesus relevant today.
John, I would dispute a little of what you said. If the Jesus movement kind of fading away, I don't think it did. It influenced, at least the church in America, phenomenally. The entire baby boomer generation. We had the church changed to where you could respond to the current culture with its music and other stuff and still be faithful to the Bible. I think you see the revolution, and you've been involved with the Christian music. The worship music has changed. It's relevant to the society. You hear the same type of music in church as you hear in the radio and your CDs or streaming. So I think the key, and this is how we reach people in any age, to realize that faith in Jesus is innately countercultural. In that, or maybe I should say it's transcultural. It's not related, it's not linked to any one culture. It can exist in any culture, and at the same time, it will be countercultural. When you look at the secular culture or even a traditional religious culture that's lost the fire, the passion for God, we've lost the desire to bring people to God, a Jesus movement will stand against that in a very, very good way. So back to the other question, how do we win people today? We be as cultural as Jesus wants us to be. We don't buy in to, what would be the best term on that? Counterfeits that kind of mock it. Back in the 60s, people wanted intimacy. We thought it was late 60s of sexual intimacy, but people needed that personal connection between people. Basic needs that people have, and how we look for love in all the wrong places. And we direct people to say, hey, here's where you get the abundant life. Here's where you get life to the max. And ironically, I think all people need something to give their life to. One of the leaders I had said, if we can't find anything better to worship, we worship ourselves. And I like that verse in John 17:3, where Jesus said, this is eternal life, that they might know you, the only true God, And that's got to be our focus, apart from all the other things in life. We need to make a living. We need to eat. We need shelter. We need clothing. But we need to, first of all, know God and accept his mission in our life.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense. I mean, I think that's what my whole life has been about. And I think perhaps the revival element was something that dissipated a bit, but I absolutely take on board. There's people around the world today who were touched by the Jesus movement. And I mean, I think of Tim Hughes, worship leader, who's just down the road from us at Gas Street Church. And Tim Hughes has written some fantastic stuff, even during lockdown. And he actually is a product of the Jesus movement, even though he doesn't perhaps realize it. You know, Kent Henry is a friend of mine out in St. Louis. He's a product of the Jesus movement. Bless him. And I think that sense of self-giving. I'll tell you a story about Kent. I was driving home from church in my 1962 Chevy. It was great. You could see if you're on the road or not. If you just look down at your feet and you'd see the tarmac. It was so rusty. And Kent drove by in his car with his wife, Carla. And the next Sunday, he said, John, actually phoned me up. He said, John, when you come in, I've got something for you. And he came in, he handed me the keys to this beautiful Volkswagen. He said, the Lord showed me I should give you my car. I was totally blown away and so blessed. And that car went on to bless somebody that was training for the mission field. I asked them a few years ago, so what happened to that Volkswagen? They said, oh, I gave it to somebody else who they were starting out in missions. So I don't know how it ended up in the end, but it's that self-giving that is such a beautiful aspect of our faith. And during COVID-19, here in England anyway, we've seen really beautiful examples of this giving. It's like I've become closer to individuals, not many, but it doesn't have to be many, just a few neighbors, one or two people at the church in significant ways. And I think that's the key. It's the significance of self-giving. It's the significance of knowing that the life that we live it's in Jesus, but it's not inside a church building. It's outside. Now, you spend a lot of time outside of a church building because I don't know how many motorbikes you've got now, but I know you love the open roads. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your experiences on your motorbike? I mean, Tim has written this fantastic devotional called God, a Motorbike, and the Open Road, a biker's devotional. We're going to put a link to it down below in the description of this video because you really need to get it off of Amazon. But you know, this devotional side, you're mixing with oil and kickstarting and so forth. Can you explain that to us a little bit?
You know, I started off back in college. My senior year, I was going to go up with my roommate to visit another friend of ours who moved to Canada. Mark, right at the end of the year, ran out of money. He didn't have it. And I got in a wreck in my little 64 Falcon. And then to take a break from studying for finals, a bunch of us decided to go to see a movie. I don't know who chose it. It was Easy Rider.
I was going to say, it had to be Easy Rider.
Yeah, and that's all it took. I got captivated, not so much by the sex and drugs, because really, Easy Rider, if you look at it, was a very Christian movie. Looked at the sex and drugs and said, it doesn't work. They ended up dead on the side of the road. But the freedom of the open road captivated me. So I bought a little 350 Honda, rode it to Canada, and just, it changed my life. It's transformative. There's something, and I wasn't a Christian on that trip, but what I found, and this is kind of the theme of my life, and it ties into the book, my blog, Unconventional, we often think the biggest parts of the Christian life are the big issues. What I found, it's the little ones. When we can start to see God in every little dimension of life. In Romans 14, Paul said, anything not done from faith is sin. Or we need to do everything out of desire for faith and look for God in the little things. I've been to a writers' conference up at Mount Hermon, and the leader there, David Talbot, said, you'll experience divine appointments. And they may not seem that way at first. But there are so many times up at Mount Hermon, I think anytime you get Christians together, God shows up totally unexpectedly. And we need our eyes open. And that's part of why I ride. I look and I see up in British Columbia mountains, this huge mountain that it's stratified, but it's bent at a 90-degree angle. To think of the power that God put in to push it up and to bend it without breaking it. And it shows the awesomeness of God. And riding a bike, it's kind of like in Romans, where you can see God's divine power and deity in the world. And on a bike, you're right out in the middle of it. You don't have a steel cocoon keeping you from seeing it. Convertibles are the next best. But motorcycles, you're out in the world, you smell it all, and just you see and sense God's glory and his majesty and his love.
I think it's actually hard to beat an MGB, to be honest with you. Strangely enough, I've only driven MGBs in America, not in England. But there you are. My first love was a Morris Minor that my brother had. He had a Francis Barnett motorbike from the early 60s, and I had to ride pillion on that. And it was quite an experience. But we used to actually cycle every summer on push bikes to the Welsh mountains. And we'd spend the first 3 weeks of summer building the bike, and then the next 2 weeks or 2.5 weeks destroying it on the mountains. And we drove all the way, we cycled all the way from London through Welsh mountains and back to London, never taking any form of public transport at all. We always got back somehow or other. And I think that fired for me a love for the mountains and the open road. But I've got to admit, I love the MG I've got now. But I wouldn't mind having a motorbike. But then, Tim, I'll tell you what we're going to do. I really would like for everyone here watching to know a little bit more about your books, your devotionals, and perhaps you can give us some advice. And I'm going to ask you if you could come back for a second session, and we can just do that. Look at Tim Riter, the inspirational author and writer, who's been with me this today, direct from California. I'm here in Birmingham, England. I'm John Ruffle. Some of you know me, some of you don't. Some of you know Tim. And it's great to have this conversation with you. So we'll be back on the next video. Thank you so much for being with us today, Tim.